Welcome to Exquisite Revolt. Today I want to talk about practical effects. Not just for nostalgia purposes or kind of critical, technical conversation. Practical effects relate to creative labor and world building, especially solo world building. The film The Fly is one of my favorite horror films from when I was a kid. I grew up being allowed to watch horror movies in the 80s and 90s, and Cronenberg was the director of the version of the film that came out in 1986, The Fly, starring Jeff Goldblum. And my channel is not about critiquing cinema in a academic way, in a political way, in a snark type of way. There's so much content out there that kind of approaches filmmaking this way. I really want to dig deeper into the cultural analysis of the pieces as they relate to my own personal experience with them and to my own healing journey as an exennial looking back. And so when I think about The Fly and watch The Fly again as an adult, I really felt like I could see myself represented in Seth Brundle's lab and in the way that Cronenberg built this world. That the creative team used practical effects to build this world together, and how collaborative creative operations, in particular practical effects in filmmaking, are and can be. For me, I spent a lot of my life on my own, building worlds solo. And so this discussion about The Fly really comes from a longer essay that I wrote looking at 3 of Cronenberg's films as they related to practical effects and the creative work of world building and solo world building as I try to move out of isolation into a more collaborative lifestyle. What is so ironic is that I have a background in creative operations and I'm actually pretty good at it. Though I feel like I've gone down the wrong path when it comes to my career, I was really good at world building for others, at creating and facilitating space to connect, though I often stood on the outside of those communities that I built. So when I looked at this film and this essay that I wrote, I recognized that there are limits to solo world building. And that's essentially what I talk about in my essay and what I realized from the film. In the film, Jeff Goldblum's character, Seth Brundle, is a scientist and he's in his, laboratory. It's very gritty 80s New York-esque. I mean, it's not New York specifically. I think it might have been filmed in Toronto from what I remember. But it's definitely made to look like New York. And it's this gritty loft style thing that was cool at that time. And he does everything in this space. He works there, on his experiments and his scientific discoveries. And we see him in his kitchen and he eats there and he has a living space there and he has his bedroom there where he spends time with Gina Davis. And so he lives in this literal little world where he is living in isolation. When he starts to go through his transformation, becoming the hybrid Brundle Fly, he goes further and further into isolation and he doesn't actually have a community around him. And the one person whom he had, his girlfriend, Gina Davis, he actually pushes her away. And when he's going through the most intense parts of his transformation, there's no one there to witness it. And I really can relate to this kind of idea of going through transformations on your own. I've been actually on a solo world travel journey. I'm still in Europe right now. I'm an American and I've been solo traveling around the world. I've been nomadic for several years and I've been international for almost 2. And spending this much time alone, I've been to 10 countries across 4 continents. I definitely have become aware of how much I isolate myself. Now, I will say I needed the space. I needed time to heal. Everyone's different. I'm also in my 40s and just really self-identifying as neurodivergent. So that's a whole other aspect of my perspective in which, for me, I needed an extreme shift. Maybe everyone doesn't need to leave their job, everyone they know, everything they know, and like leave the country without telling anyone. But I needed space. You know, I needed to remove myself, absolve myself from the projections of other people about whom I was and how I was supposed to live my life. And I just needed some space and some time. And I also am someone where time can just kind of go by. And somehow it's like I've been in Europe for over a year, and that wasn't the plan. But this essay that I wrote that's about practical effects, I looked at 3 of my favorite Cronenberg films and looked through this lens of how we build worlds as a creative practice and how we build worlds as a means of survival. And I was able to build my own personal worlds while building worlds for others for a really long time. And so last year, I spent a month in Morocco during Ramadan in Tangier. And so I'll talk about that in the next video because I wanted to do all of the beat writer things. And so Naked Lunch is the next movie that I'm going to talk about that I wrote about in this piece. But it really helped me see how much isolation I was going through because Ramadan, a lot of people are like in the house, things are closed, not open. It wasn't tourist season. I was living in the city versus in the Casbah tourist area. So it was really, really on my own. And it helped me to kind of process that a little bit of how much of a choice that was for me to spend this much time by myself and how it's really time for me to, you know, come out of this like hermit mode, not only in the literal solo travel experience, but in my life, you know, that it was just time for me to start connecting with other people instead of living in these private spaces. Overall, a big lesson that we can take away from the film is that everyone needs support, that you can be brilliant on your own. You know, he was coming up with all of these incredible technologies and discoveries and processes, but without any witnesses, you know, to what he was doing, he was just deteriorated, literally. It is important to build your own world, right? But it's also important to invite people into your world. And I think to join in to other people's worlds, which is what I'm doing now in my new series and in my Substack, where I'm writing about my processing of film and television and media, something that I've enjoyed doing, that I have a background in doing and miss doing, but actually inviting other people to contribute and witness my transformation that I'm going through. And, you know, we all thrive more when we have engagement with other people. So I can now recognize the limits to solo world building. I've traveled all over the world and I mostly have stuck to myself. And again, I think that was just this time in my life that I was meant to do that. But obviously, a lot of people talk about their travel experiences and how they engage with other people and meet so many other people. That really wasn't my experience. I really stayed in my role as observer, which is the role that I have been in my whole life. And so I'm moving into the next chapter of my life where I do want to be more engaged with other people. And this is kind of my first step towards moving in that direction and appreciating having this internal world building as a survival mechanism, as a skill that I needed to develop to get through my life to this point, but it's also time to evolve.
We've got to do this, Seth. Talk to the tape. Get in the habit. The world will want to know what you're thinking.
Fuck is what I'm thinking.
Good. The world will want to know that.
If this way of thinking about media resonates with you, the full essay is on Substack.